Hello and welcome to VOW, Voices of Wisdom, the show that might not be for everybody, but everybody needs to watch this show. This is part 2 of my awesome interview with George Silano. Hi, George.
Hi.
We're going to get right into it because we got a lot to cover.
We sure do.
So first I want to talk about some article in the Southampton Press. It was recently in the Southampton Press, and it was a film that was shown at the library. And it was a film that had never, ever been seen. And I had the awesome pleasure of seeing it. Could you tell us how you came about that DVD?
Sure. It's just a totally serendipitous experience. I was a freelance director cameraman back in the 60s, and I got a call from Arnold Michaelis, who's a very well-known interviewer. He had his own show, and he was doing a thing called Living History, and he interviewed heads of state and famous actors. And anyway, we did this film. I did it as a freelancer, and I just I went away from it and did other projects. And Arnold was not stuck, but he was left with the material. So one thing or another, I just lost track of Arnold. And I never knew what happened to the film that we did in Martin Luther King's living room. So about 6 months ago, I was just sitting home and had an epiphany. I wonder what happened to that film.
Wow.
Right?
And this was 6 months ago?
Yes, about 6 months ago. So I got on my computer and I looked up Arnold Michaelis, and it showed his obituary with his daughter's name. And I tracked her down, and she was living in Atlanta. I called her up. I said, "What? Do you know what happened to that film? Did he?" And she said, "No, I don't." She never saw it either.
Wow.
And so she said, "But here's someone you can call," because her father donated everything to the University of Georgia.
Okay.
So I called the woman who was in charge of that, and she said, "Yes, there is a film here about Martin Luther King." So she said, "I'll be glad to send you a DVD." So she sent up the DVD, and I saw it for the first time.
And what was that like, seeing that for the first
Well,
time?
it was amazing because of the power of it. You know,
Yeah.
when it's put together.
Right.
You know, it's 50 years ago, so it was like a brand new experience to see it assembled and see the power of it and the power of his thought.
Right.
Of his thoughts on various subjects. So I showed it to my ex-wife, who lives here in the Hamptons, and she said, "Oh, the people at Southampton Library would love to see this." So I called up Penny Wright, and she came over to my house with her associate, Antoinette, and they both looked at it and they said, "My God, we've got to show this on Martin Luther King's birthday, January 21st.
Right.
So I said, "Okay, I'll check it out, see if I'm allowed to do that." And they said yes, as long as there's no money exchange. So anyway, that's how this happened. So the library made up flyers, and they were, so I got a couple of flyers and I sent them to the newspapers, and the reporters came to my house and did these articles. And the film was shown last Monday, or the 28th of January.
Right.
It's a 54-minute piece.
Right.
So then, back in memory lane, you know.
Yes, let's go down memory lane a little bit.
Tell
us how
back
that
in
whole
'65,
process.
you know, we flew down there and arrived at his house, and we stayed at a hotel, and you know, went over to his house, and we met Martin Luther King and Coretta King, and then he let us be there, whatever we wanted to do.
Really?
So I saw that picture of Mahatma Gandhi in his living room, and I said, "I think we should shoot right there with you on the sofa," and he agreed, and Arnold agreed, and that's where we did this setup with Arnold sitting right next to him. And then I had to do this with one camera because Arnold was doing this with his own money.
Right.
So we had sort of a low budget,
Right.
and we didn't have any network behind us. There was no real guaranteed airtime for the film, so Arnold would be left in assembling it, and
Right.
you know, all that goes with that, and then trying to sell it. He never thought that it'd be a problem to sell it.
Right, because what was happening during that time?
But see, the networks have their own public affairs departments, and they don't, it's like going to Calvin Klein, you know, with a new design for a suit jacket. He'll say, "Thanks very much, we'll let you know."
Yeah,
because he's got his own design department.
Right.
So that the networks were not ready to pick up this film. So I don't know what happened. Poor Arnold. Actually, Arnold died a poor man.
Really?
There's no money, not much money to be made in documentaries, except for a few cases, like Ken Burns, and another man I work with named Charlie Guggenheim, who won 4 Academy Awards doing documentaries. But anyway, that's what happened with that.
But do you think that maybe the network didn't pick it up because it was Martin Luther King?
That could be a problem. As the years passed, I learned that J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, considered Martin Luther King to be a threat to national security. So I said, that might be a reason. And especially so since there was an actual trial after his assassination in 1999. The King family sued the United States government for complicity in the assassination.
And you know, George,
and they won the case.
But George, that was the case. That was a trial of the century. It wasn't O.J.
Right, that's right.
But we never knew about that trial.
Exactly.
No one ever knew about that trial.
It was in Memphis.
Who was in the room? Who was in the courtroom?
There were only 2 reporters in the room. One was a pretty famous author named James Douglas, and some woman from Portugal. But the government had such control that they kept all the network press and press out of that courtroom. So nobody knew about it.
I don't think anybody knew about that court case.
And anyone could go to their computer and look up MLK versus U.S. government, and you'll see all the websites and all the detail. So, but what you're suggesting is that maybe that's why the networks didn't pick
it up.
That could be another reason. I think you're right. It's possible.
So continue to tell us a little bit more about. I guess it was the Poor People's Campaign during that time? Because at that point, he was really opposing the Vietnam War,
Well,
correct?
yeah, the Vietnam War really got under his skin. And we asked him about that in the film. Why should you think that you could get involved with politics? You're a member of the cloth.
Right.
And in America, we love separation of church and state. He said, his answer was that simply he reached a point where he had to take a stand. And the reason why he had to take a stand were really 2 reasons, I think. One is that there was, before the Vietnam War started, there was a lot of government money being allocated, to educating poor people and taking care of poor people's needs.
Right.
I mean, if you're gonna have a country with all these wonderful values, you've got to step up to the plate and take care of the country.
You think?
Otherwise,
you think?
right? You would, right? Does that make sense? I mean, you can't have a legitimate, marvelous country with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and have these pockets of humanity being left alone and ignored. Exactly. So anyway, the money, when the Vietnam War started, the money began to be taken away from all those projects and used to buy bombs. And the other reason that he didn't like the war was because it was barbaric.
Yes.
Now, it ends up that we dropped 7.8 million tons of bombs on that backward country where people just made $100 a year.
Could you repeat that?
And in 7.8 million tons, and in the whole of World War II, they only dropped 2.7 million tons. So it was so grotesque that the military power of America to drop that many bombs on an agrarian country. And I looked up the country, I studied it a bit, I read a few books about it. The country had never been unified in 3,000 years, but somehow our State Department or somebody wanted a foothold in Southeast Asia.
Well, do you know why?
Because communist China began to appear expansive.
Okay.
And so they were afraid of what they call the domino theory, that if you don't stop them now, they're going to just take over everything. So that was, I think that was the general premise. But of course it was unnecessary, just as the Iraq War was unnecessary.
Right.
There were never any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Exactly.
Right?
So that's why Martin Luther King was so adamant against the war.
Right. And then he made a famous speech at the Riverside Church in New York in 1967. That was like a little bit like 2 years after we were in his living room.
Yes.
But when we were in his living room, I could see him warming up.
Really?
Warming up for the big event.
Right.
Where he absolutely took a stand and was willing to go wherever it took him. He was like a clipper ship. And when he made that speech in '67, where he referred to America as the most vicious country on earth, that really got them, got their attention in Washington.
But it wasn't good, though.
Then he planned on a 500,000 camp in Washington.
Was that known to George? I don't remember hearing about that.
No, you didn't hear much about it, but he was planning that, and of course everyone found out about it. But he was going to have 500,000 people put tents up in Washington and stay there until the war was ended.
Wow.
And so that was the coup de grace. That was, he walked right into the Dante's Inferno with that plan. So he had to be taken care of.
Yeah. So who was behind, you think, some of this? Oh, it was J. Edgar Hoover was the president at the time.
Yeah. Well,
So-
there's not many people that I've ever talked to about this knows it. But Harry Truman started it, and he signed into law what they call the shadow government. And we're talking about the 40s.
So he signed this into law.
Yeah, it actually exists. It's called the shadow government. And their mandate for the shadow government is that their mandate is to keep America protected. And they can use whatever means they want, including assassination if necessary, to do what they think is necessary to do to keep America safe, right? And so there's a great suspicion now that they were involved in the JFK assassination and the Bobby Kennedy assassination, because they were dealing with gentlemen who were impinging on the power structure. For instance, Kennedy he had plans to stop the war in Vietnam and get out of Vietnam by 1965, that sort of thing. And he fired the head of the CIA, Allen Dulles, and there are so many things that we could go into.
So
but
James Earl Ray was a scapegoat.
James Earl Ray was a complete patsy, and he was assigned a government lawyer to defend him. And the government lawyer said, if you sign this confession, you will be guaranteed. He wanted a trial. See, James Earl Ray wanted to have a trial because he didn't shoot Martin Luther King, right? So the lawyer said, if you sign this confession, you're guaranteed a trial. So he signed it, and that guaranteed him not to have a trial.
Wow.
So it was like a lot of monkey business going on. But if you read those websites that I suggested, you'll see the chapter and the detail comes out of the case that was presented to the jurors, and it took them, I think, 2 hours to decide the government was guilty. This was a civil trial.
So you're talking about the civil trial with Martin Luther King?
Yes, a civil trial.
Okay, so
they couldn't have a criminal trial because of James Earl Ray's position, where they declined to have him reviewed. Once he signed that confession, then after he signed it, then he wanted to retract the confession, but it was too late. And so they just had that nailed. The criminal trial would not be allowed to be happening because of what they did with what James Earl Ray and his attorney did. So they could only do the civil trial, and the jurors took like less than 2 hours, I think, to come to a decision.
But we have to make sure the audience know that they did win the trial.
They did win the trial. They sued the government for $100 because they didn't want the appearance of doing it for money. So the government admitted that some of their agencies were complicit in the assassination of Martin Luther King.
So they admitted that.
Yeah. It's right there. It's public record.
Selah. That's all I'm going to say right now is Selah. Wow.
Now, you'll never see another man like Martin Luther King, I don't think.
Tell me about how you feel about him.
Because a man with that character would be who understood what he was doing, and he understood the seriousness of it. And to continue to do that in the face of what he knew was an amazing thing to see. You'll never see, I mean, in the past 50 years since he's gone, do you know of anybody who had that kind of character?
No.
I can't think of anyone myself. And now, everything is run by money. It's all about money, not ideas. Now, here's a great example of a man who had pure ideas that were logical and was smashed by the power structure.
I actually...
I mean, that's something to think about.
It is. There was another interview I happened to check out because you was telling me about some of the other interviews. I happened to see an interview with him. I keep saying it was Michael Douglas' show. I thought it was a Michael Douglas show that I saw.
Yeah, that you did. That's right. He had a good interview with Martin.
I can't forget. There was a question that Michael Douglas asked him, was just beyond me. He said, "How long are Negroes willing to wait for equality?" Can you believe that?
Right, right.
But it was just so awesome how intelligent Martin Luther King was. He was able to, because they seemed like they kept trying to trap him and, you know, put him in the corner, but he kept coming back. And I'm sure, I mean, I don't think this guy interviewed him. I don't think he put him in any corners. But can you say how intelligent he was? I mean, we talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
How he was just...
Well, see, getting back to what I was suggesting is that if you're going to have a country like the United States of America with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, that stands for something that has real value. But if you have a country where you have pockets of people who are totally ignored because of their race or their religion, you can't really stand up and say, "Hey, look, you know, this is my country. I'm proud of it." It just can't be done, right?
No.
Unless you want to sweep it under the cover and ignore it. And so that's what Martin Luther King was all about. He took the stand and he went all the way with it. And very few people would do that.
Knowing, you know, obviously it got to a point where he knew, and he even talked about it, I think even in this interview, that it was to death. You know, he had made up his mind. He was at that place, like you said, he had focused in.
Do you know the FBI actually sent him an anonymous letter suggesting that he commit suicide? Right, and he ignored that.
Wow.
So when I say he knew a lot,
Right.
and still considered that he wanted to, he had to take a stand on what he felt, right? And it's just a rare character. You'll never see somebody like that.
And before I forget, also in this interview, you interviewed Coretta.
And Coretta was on camera. We did a wonderful piece with her, where she described when she first met him, and she was a little bit reluctant because he was a minister.
Right, she said she was not marrying a minister.
And they were all, you know, they all wore black suits.
Yeah,
and she was afraid to get involved with somebody like that.
Right.
But when she met him, she found out that he was a real humanist, and that's what seduced her.
And I remember, I don't know, was this interview or another interview I saw where he was saying how supportive she was for him.
Right.
And like he
So
really
Arnold,
couldn't have done this without him.
Exactly.
Without her.
Arnold was asking Martin Luther King about that. Where did you teach Coretta?
Right. That's right. That's
or
right.
did he said on the contrary, she taught me.
Yeah.
And
I think they met in college,
Yeah,
and
I
they
think
were
so.
saying they had the same values.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. That's right. That's what attracted him to her.
So I think that's really, like, you know, profound, even that interview with her and all the things she was saying and sharing.
She was talking about how her children were coming home and saying, "Mommy, they're calling me nigger."
That's right.
And she described to the kids, you know, how they can cope with that.
Right.
So that's really was a nice kind of insight into what they had to live through.
And not understanding, and also all the threats that she had to go through.
Well, their house was bombed.
Yes.
They almost got killed.
What year was that?
That was in Memphis.
That
when
was
they lived in Memphis. I'm not sure of the year. But then Martin Luther King, when he was through the interview, Arnold was talking to him, and he was put in jail in Memphis. And so the kids were asking, "Why is Daddy in jail?"
Right.
So Martin said, "Tell the kids that I'm going to stay in jail until they're allowed to play in that park where they wouldn't let Negro children play." So that was kind of interesting.
There was even a little excerpt of when his son came and cuddled against him, sat next to him. I thought it was very intimate as well.
Right. You know, and being with Dr. King for lunch, we'd break for lunch, and he was just wonderful and you know, very natural, and just the way he appears in the media. And he was just great to be with. We talked about Vietnam and his interests, and it was fun. I mean, I just keep pinching myself to have been, you know, with such an iconic figure for like 3 or 4 days.
And you know, I keep feeling, you know, when you share and talk about him, how humble he was, how humble he was.
Yes, that's what I mean.
You know,
It was just, we sat on the porch together, like regular guys, and
yeah,
we shot
yeah.
we shot the breeze. And now looking back on it, it was like, holy mackerel.
So like, that's the other thing. I think a young lady asked you that question in the audience. How was it when you actually saw the film again for the first time?
Right, right.
What did I mean, where did you go with that when you first saw it? What was going through your mind?
Yeah,
when
yeah,
you
because
first saw
it was like revelatory, because when you see all that material, when you're shooting it, it's like you're in tunnel vision, and you see one scene at a time, and I'm listening to Arnold asking the question, and I'm watching. See, my job was what do you do with the camera? Do you fool around with the zoom lens?
Right.
Do you make a
right.
lot of movements?
Exactly.
And my thought was that the thing that we were doing was sort of cerebral. So I was thinking about, when you're filming Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, you don't do close-ups. You do wide shots to see, because it's all about arms and legs, right?
Okay.
But with Martin Luther King, it's all cerebral, so you don't want to do any kind of movement. You just sort of stay on him.
That's interesting.
He's the main theme and what he's talking about. So you don't want to do any kind of movement, unless there's no with this interview. There are no big highs and lows. It's like horizontally structured in terms of emotion.
Right.
What he's talking about.
Right.
So my job was to keep quiet, George. Don't do anything.
Right.
And that's the way we filmed it.
But
So then when I saw it assembled, it only gained more power. Of course, it's hard to remember 50 years back, right?
Right.
So it was actually all brand new. And I was very excited to see it.
Wow.
I mean, every time I see it, I'm still moved by it. I've seen it maybe 4 times now.
Wow.
And I'll see it again, if you like, with pleasure.
Yes, yes. The thing that, also that I want to share is, I think all of us in that room who saw that film
Yeah, last Monday.
Yeah. I think we were all in awe of it all, that, just to hear some of the things, how he responded about the war and about, his feelings. Even, he was so, even comical about his children, and about life.
Well, that's what I was saying earlier, is that his thoughts were pure, and you couldn't really take exception to them, right? And that's what I'm saying. There's an example, an overwhelming, overt example of someone who has, the truth shall set you free, right?
Yes, yes.
We often talk about that.
Yeah.
And he talked about that in the interview. He said, world leaders are always talking about peace. We're doing it for peace. But they go to war to get to peace.
Right. Because we talked about the Nobel Peace Prize. Right. How he felt when he received that.
Yeah.
He said, how can he receive that when we still have people?
I mean, 2 weeks after he won the award in Oslo, he came back and he had to go to Memphis and go on that march to sell, and it was like people were being killed and beaten by the police and by government forces. I mean, it was like bizarre.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. How can you stand up and say, I'm an American and I'm proud of it, and this is why I'm proud of it? You can't do that if you have pockets of people that are being ignored, right? And we continually face that because we have illegal immigration, we have 12 million people who are illegal, and you've got to resolve that issue, otherwise you can't say, and you can't stand up and be proud.
That's it.
Right?
That's it.
You want to have a country? Let's go and do the right thing.
Absolutely.
The truth shall set you free.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that's what he was all about.
Yes, yes.
But he was crushed by the power structure. And now, starting this year, there's a new facility that's going to be operational in Utah, which is a government facility that is keeping track of who your dentist is, how many cavities you have, where you buy your gas, where you buy your food. Is
that Big Brother, George?
It's Big Brother has now reached a point where, like I'm saying, if you use cash only, the red flag is gonna show up.
Really?
Yeah, because if you use cash only, you're a suspect, right? That's what's happening. So now, I mean, it's going to be good for getting hold of terrorists, right?
Right.
But at the same time, we are sacrificing a huge amount of incursion into your private life.
Yes, yes.
And they'll be able to tell now, they've already had relationships with all the telephone companies. They've already been keeping track of all your phone conversations. But now it's going to be everything. What you buy, what kind of food you like.
Wow.
And they'll be able to analyze your profile. Everyone who exists in the world is now going to be profiled.
Wow.
About such things. Do you like Ritz crackers or
Yeah, I do, by the way.
Oreos?
Wow, wow.
It's going to be that bad.
Wow. Well, we're wrapping this up, but could you share with us too that we want to show excerpts of the clip, but we can't show it because
the people at the archives in Georgia, at the university, they would rather we don't do that at this point because they're developing a new version of the film that we showed. So in the future, we're going to see something even better than what we showed last Monday.
And you know that I know where you live now. So I intend to track you down so we can get a copy of that revised copy.
It'll be a pleasure when the coast is clear and I have it in my hands, I'll call you.
Great, and I'm sure we'll be able to set up something, I mean, even to show it maybe here at LTV, in
Sure.
Southampton or wherever.
Actually, they did say they'd love that.
Great, great, great.
Okay, but we'll just have to wait a bit.
George, this has been wonderful.
Well, I love being with you.
Wonderful interview.
And thank you for calling me over.
I will. I'm glad you came. I just want the audience to know that George Silano sat in the living room of Martin Luther King and interviewed him. And I think it's just a historical moment that even coming up now of Black History Month. And I want to thank you, George, for tracking that down. And thank your ex-wife for insisting that it be shown at the library. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful film. And I'm looking forward to seeing the reversion of it as well.
Okay.
So thank you. This is Brenda, Voices of Wisdom. You have a wonderful, wonderful day.